Hi, welcome back. So in this video, I'm going to be introducing the terminal. So now that we've installed all of our required programs and software and systems, we're now going to move in to working with the terminal. So firstly, what is the terminal? Well, pretty much a terminal is a way to interact with your operating system directly. Now, of course, there are many ways to interact with your operating system. So, for example, if I just open up the File Explorer here, you can see I can go through my desktop, my folders, I can interact with it. On top of that, this desktop is a way to interact with your operating system. It was built into Windows to give a more user-friendly experience. But all of this is just solely built off of the terminal. So if I'm going to go ahead and open up my command prompt here, which is the Windows terminal, and you can see it's quite large. I'm trying to make the font big so that everyone can see it. But all of this is built off of the command prompt, this terminal and the commands that come with it. And basically, this goes the same to Git and source tree. So I'm going to give you a little analogy. So Git gives you all of the commands, the backbone, all of that. But then source tree, which is our GUI that we're going to be using later, allows you to have a more user-friendly experience when using Git instead of typing into a black and white terminal. So that's pretty much what an operating system does. It takes these bare-bone commands that you do through a shell or a terminal, and it allows you to do all of these things, but in a more user-friendly fashion. That's pretty much the goal of an operating system, such as Windows, Mac, or Linux. The goal is to make a more user-friendly experience and hiding all of the complicated terminal stuff that goes on behind the scenes. But even with this, there's still a lot of stuff that you can do in the terminal that you cannot do with these GUIs. And the workflow is a lot easier, especially for developers, which is why we're using it. On top of having a lot of different systems, such as Git, built through the terminal. So I'm just going to open up my Ubuntu bash shell here, and we're going to explain the difference between this and a few others. So I'm going to go ahead and open up this and our command prompt. So I'm going to go Windows run, and I'm just going to type CMD and click OK. And that's going to open up our CMD, or our Windows shell. And if you're wondering, a shell and a terminal are almost the exact same thing. A shell is just a way to interact with your operating system, which is what a terminal is. So let's go ahead and look at some of the differences. So you can see, first of all, the font is a little bit big. We're not going to worry about that for now. But pretty much what this allows you to do is here you're directly in your Windows machine. You can see we're in our C drive /users/JAD. And we're going to explain file systems later, but we're in our Windows machine. Whereas here, this is more of a subsystem. So we're actually inside Ubuntu when we're using this terminal. And sure, we can't interact with it, such as the way we interact with Windows, but the reason that we're in Ubuntu and not our Windows directory is because, remember in the installation video when we went through and we ticked the Windows subsystem for Linux and all of that? Well, that was actually Windows or Microsoft taking the initiative and actually enabling you to create a subsystem of Linux or Ubuntu inside your Windows machine. So it created this Linux subsystem in which you can now install these Linux distributions. So for example, Ubuntu or any other distribution you want to use. And from there, we're pretty much interacting with the Ubuntu operating system. Now, of course, we don't have any GUIs, but we have this terminal which allows us to interact with it. And if I actually show you cd ... now you don't need to know these commands for now, but if I actually list all of the files, you can see we have none of this stuff in our home drive for Windows, because if I go to our command prompt now and I actually type ls, it won't work because it's not recognized as a command in the command prompt. So you can see that these are very different shells. The Windows shell has a completely different set of commands than a regular bash shell, which is, by the way, the most commonly used one for developers. Not many people use the command prompt, and the bash shell is kind of considered the universal terminal to use. So that's why we're going to be using this one. Now, I'm just going to teach you how to access your Windows drive right here. So if you do cd ... twice, it's going to bring you up to your root. If you want to get into your Windows drive, all you need to do is cd into mount. Now, you don't need to know what this does or what cd does, but basically just think of this as moving between directories. So from here, you can now cd into your Windows drive. So you can see it's mount/c, which is the C drive, as you can see here. And now from here, you can go pretty much wherever you want. We have our program files, but if you want to get to your user, so your desktop, your files, you have to cd into users. And then from there, you can cd into your user. And then you can do whatever you want from there. So I have my desktop, my documents, all of that here. So you can see that these do have some slight differences between the Windows shell and the Ubuntu Bash terminal. But again, if you're on Mac or Linux, you don't really have to go through any of this because you already have a native shell installed. But for Windows users, this is the best way to get a native shell without using our Git Bash. So there we go. Now that we've explained some of the differences between a terminal and what it is, let's move on to some other things about the terminal. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about file structure. So if we go into our file explorer, and let's say I just want to open some random text document. So what I would do, let's say I go into my desktop, I open my folders, I open my projects, all of that, and you can see I have a bunch of stuff here. This is just a dummy project, don't worry what these names mean or anything. But let's just say I want to go here and there's some random text file that I want to use. So I'm going to go and create a new text file, and I'm just going to call this file.txt. Sorry. There we go. So I've created a text file. And we did all of that through the GUI. But how do we do this through the terminal? And more importantly, what does it look like? Because clearly, it's not just going to list all of it in a neat, nice order like this, with icons and everything. So this is how it works. Now, if I actually click here, you can see that it brings up this path. So without it, it says, this PC and then to desktop, to folders, to project. But if you click on it, it gives you this path. So if you already don't know what a path is, or if you're just starting out, basically what it allows you to do is specify what folder you're in. So it allows you to classify everything. So we start with the top level, which is the C drive. Then we go into our users, then your specified user, then your desktop, then folders, then projects. So it's kind of in a classification kind of order. So there's a top level set, which is your C drive, and then inside that there's users, then your user, then desktops, and so on. So we can actually interact with this directly through the terminal. Now I'm just going to make this full screen, and I'm going to clear it because there's a lot of ugly bars in the screen. But you can see here that there is our path right there. That is where we currently are. And this path specifies where we can go. So, and what we can do with the folder. So in the future, when we start learning the basics of Git, you can use a command called git init, which allows you to initialize Git in that folder or that directory. So you can do all sorts of things, but basically the path allows you to see what folder you're in. And depending on what folder you're in, you can run certain commands, executions, functions, all sorts of things like that. So now that we're done with paths, let's explain some of the different parts of the terminal. So you can see right here, I have my user, and you can see if you're on any machine, you can share users. You can have multiple users on a single machine. So you have your username, and then the name of the machine. Usually it's your model number or something similar to that. So there you go. That's going to tell you the name of your machine, and that's going to give you your username. And then after the colon, it's going to be your path. But by default, I'm just going to close off the terminal. I'm going to close that. Now, if I'm going to open my Ubuntu shell here so you can see what it's going to look like for you from the start, you're going to see this, this little character here. So what does that actually signify? Well, this signifies your home directory. So pretty much all terminals have a home directory that you can edit through editing files in some text editor or some IDE. We're not going to go into editing it, but pretty much that symbol signifies your default directory. So I'm just going to, cd out of here. And like I said, you don't need to know any of these commands. But what I'm trying to do is just get away from the directory. So let's say I go really, really far and I want to get back to the start, which is our starting directory for Ubuntu. So I'm in my C drive right now, but I don't want to go back and retrace all of my steps. I don't want to do cd ... all of that to go back. What I want to do is just go straight to it. there's actually a very simple command to go to your default directory. It's just cd and then that character. It's right above tab for Windows users. So there you go. That character signifies your home directory instead of having to type the whole thing out or moving backwards or all sorts of things like that. So just know that that character signifies your home path or your home directory. And when you type that in, there you go, takes you back there. So that's pretty much it for the paths and terminal. And now that we've covered all of the parts, we're going to move on to some of the more interesting stuff. So we're going to go through, we're going to learn some of the commands. And I'm sure you've already kind of picked up some of the commands here. It's quite easy to pick up, but what we're going to do, go through, learn the commands, and just get really familiar with the terminal before we move on to Git. Now, if you're already experienced with the terminal, you do not have to go and take this section. It's for users who are just beginning with maybe their development careers or something like that. So if you're experienced with the terminal, feel free to skip this section. Most of this stuff you probably already know, but if you have no idea what a terminal is, then you should probably stick along and learn some of these commands. Alright, let's move on.